So the question was asked, why does the bureaucracy work? And I think in our discussions about government, oftentimes the bureaucracy doesn't get a lot of attention, but it is indeed designed to be the front lines of government operations. This is where the Congress, the President, and the courts all kind of come together to be the government services that we as citizens come to rely on. And you can think about the bureaucracy as basically the day-to-day administration. This is where the day-to-day activities, oftentimes the hourly activities of government is done. But this administration is all done on what's called delegated power. And I think this is going to be an important concept for folks to be thinking about as we think and try and answer the question, why does the bureaucracy work? Now, bureaucrats, those government employees, are oftentimes given a negative impression, but they are the trained, they are knowledgeable, they are the professional experts in a particular area. And we'll get into the different areas that the bureaucracy covers. But anybody who works within government is considered to be a bureaucrat. If they have expertise, if they have knowledge, if they have experience in a particular area, and they work for the government, they are considered to be a bureaucrat. Now, their work is based on the responsibility and power given by statutory authorization. And what does statutory authorization mean? Well, it's very simple. It's the laws passed by the legislature and signed by the executive to create the bureaucracy. All bureaucracies have to be created by legislation, has to be signed off by the chief executive in order for it to exist. And so statutory authority is basically the power given by the legislature, given by the executive to these bureaucrats. Now, oftentimes statutory language can contain different types of language. And again, when we've been talking about the Constitution, we talk about the fact that words matter. Well, words matter just as much as in the laws and in the statutory authorization. And for example, there could be language that is discretionary, that gives power to make decisions to the bureaucrats. Language could also be non-discretionary, meaning they have to do something. Then there's also what is called constraints, or language that constrains a particular bureaucrat. To give you an example of the different types of these languages, there are some authorizations, statutory authorizations, that allow departments to regulate or to try and control different types of activities. And so one example of a discretionary form of language is, for example, the Department of Agriculture may institute regulations to curb waste from hog farms. Now notice I have may italicized. That's giving the Department of Agriculture the power to say, yes, we will institute regulations, or maybe we won't institute regulations about trying to curb waste from hog farms. That's a discretionary form of power given through language. Now, another way to do it is through non-discretionary, and here's that example. The Department of Agriculture shall institute regulations to curb waste from hog farms. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. The department will institute regulations. It has no authority to do otherwise, unlike in discretionary language. The final type of a language, constraining language, here's the example. The Department of Agriculture shall consult with farmers in developing regulations. And here what this is introducing is you have to do something, but in consultation with someone else. It constrains the language. They can't just do it within the department. They have to bring in the farmers as well, a form of constraining language. Now, specifically, how does the bureaucracy work depends on its bureaucratic powers. And these powers are all related to the power of executing the law and the statutes that are passed by Congress and by the President. And so one example is the power of rulemaking. Bureaucracies often have the power to tell people, specific people, to do things or not do things. And this is the power of rulemaking to create regulations. What we define this as being is a quasi-legislative power. It's kind of like making laws, but not through the regular legislative process. Another power of the bureaucracy is the power of enforcement and implementation. And so this power of enforcing, this power of implementing, is indeed an executive power. And this is why the bureaucracy, for the most part, is typically housed within the executive branch, reporting to the president. The final type of power is the power of adjudicating, or adjudication. And this is what we call a quasi-judicial power, because once a bureaucracy creates a rule, it creates a regulation, it then goes about enforcing and implementing that regulation. It also has the power oftentimes to decide, did somebody break those rules? Did somebody violate those regulations? And therefore, what kind of punishment can we impose upon those rule breakers? So the power of rulemaking, enforcement, and adjudicating are all the powers that help the bureaucracy do what it needs to do. Now, to give you an example of the bureaucracy in operation, how the bureaucracy is actually working, I thought it would be wise to give you a sense of it in the time of COVID-19, what we're confronting with the coronavirus. And I think it's best portrayed by one person by the name of Anthony Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci. If you've watched any of the press conferences coming out of the White House, you have probably seen this gentleman, along with President Trump, briefing reporters and the nation about COVID-19. Dr. Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and he's probably the nation's leading expert, the point person for dealing with and trying to understand the coronavirus. He is a bureaucrat because he works for the president and the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And in his role as director of the Institute for Infectious Diseases, he is charged with providing expertise, knowledge, and advice to both the president and to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to try and confront and deal with this novel virus. And if you think about the bureaucratic organization that he's in, as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, he is part of the structure of the National Institutes of Health. Now, the National Institutes of Health has 27 different operations, centers, and institutes, all designed to focus on particular areas. So, for example, cancer is one of the national institutes. There are people that are working on cancer-related issues, trying to find cures for cancer. The National Institutes of Health all belong under the umbrella of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And the Health and Human Services is overseen by a Secretary of Health and Human Services, and that particular person is nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate. And ultimately, it is indeed the President who is at the top of the chain when it comes to the bureaucratic organization that Dr. Fauci reports to. The President also oversees a number of cabinet departments beyond just Health and Human Services. Everything from agriculture to defense to the Justice Department to the Treasury Department to Veterans Affairs. All of these cabinet departments, along with a number of other bureaucratic agencies, are considered to be part of the executive branch, and they are indeed the bureaucracy. Now notice, each of these cabinet departments focuses on one specific topic or issue for the American people. And so all of these different areas report ultimately to the President, but this is indeed the bureaucracy. And what we do is divide up the labor to focus on specific areas that the cabinet departments are charged with. So I'd kind of wrap up the answer to this particular question, why does the bureaucracy work, with some final thoughts here. Basically, the bureaucracy works because it's a structure to carry out government activities. Anything that the government does, it does it through the bureaucracy. And that's an important component of our government. It's composed of nonpartisan experts. Dr. Fauci has worked for a number of presidents, going back to President Reagan, when he was tasked with focusing on the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And so these experts are the bureaucrats, the government workers that carry out the government activities. All government activities have to have delegated power from the legislature and the executive to do their job. They can create rules, they can execute and enforce those rules, and they can deal with rule breakers. That's ultimately the power that the bureaucracy has at its disposal. But the important thing is that the bureaucracy must be responsive to what the President and what Congress wants. And oftentimes you will see a real battle over the bureaucracy between what the President wants, what Congress wants, and the bureaucracy is oftentimes caught in the middle. They have to serve multiple bosses if they want to get their jobs done. Ultimately, I would leave the fact that why the bureaucracy works is because it's designed to serve the public. It's designed to serve the citizens. For example, Dr. Fauci would say, we are trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19, the coronavirus. This is our task for serving the public.